It is very tempting as we hear the start of this complaining to disparage the Israelites for their griping, for their inability to get it together. And it would be easy for me to go there and to take that track and to talk about those gripes, and I perhaps will in a future sharing. For I know something of that. Each morning at my house as my kids file into the kitchen, there is an ongoing complaint about which cereal it is going to be, usually the one that you did not pick up off the shelf. Since we have the introduction of soy milk in my house, will it be soy milk? Will it be regular milk? Will it be the purple spoon or the red spoon? Goodness, at IKEA, when I bought that multicolored pack, looking for some monochromatic option, but alas, each and every morning there is gripes. And it could be that if I take it from the perspective that they are acting their ages 2 and 4, that they're blinded by hunger in such a way that they just desperately need what they need when they need it. And my husband and I have been their gift to arrive on the scene and to decode over time what it is exactly that we can provide so that they can ease into their day with a sense not only of their bellies full, but of their love that has been had for them by their doting parents. Yes, it can be tempting to go down this path. We see that the Israelites are so young in their newfound liberation. They had gone through the time of trial there with Pharaoh, still trying to figure out what God is calling them into. And here is Moses in week 6 of his leadership. I won't point out that I'm in week 6 of my enabling ministership. He's getting his feet underneath him, and it calls us to a deep realization that it's not so much about these gripes as about the deep-seated hunger that they feel. Because back in Egypt, they were fed. They were fed in order to fuel the economy. Because in order to be slaves, they had to have full bellies and have enough strength to do the work that would be required of empire. And so those calories had fed them in such a way that they come to this place where there are no calories, and their bodies, their physical persons, their minds, their spirits don't know what to do with it. And so they do the natural thing. They go to the seeming seat of power. They come before Moses, and they try to lay it at his feet. A deep sense. Can we think on this? Instead of going down that gripey route, can we think of those who this very day hunger, even though we have enough bread and enough food to feed everybody in this world? There are those who are starving to death. Perhaps if we take that sobering moment, we try to consider again what it means to come to the one we think that has the only access possible to the divine in order to make it better. Thank goodness, as enabling minister, I am not expected to be Moses. Thank goodness we are at a point in community, perhaps we are not in such of our infancy, we're at least 50, right, Casey? Almost 50 years old. We're in our own developing spiritual maturity. We know that together we can grumble, and we ultimately look to a way in which God would continue to feed us. Isn't that what this is about? It's about the response of a God who hears, and we don't like the word tests. You saw that there. Tests his people, but hears and responds. When we are hungry, we so desperately, whether it's me as enabling minister or your care group person that is right there alongside you, or some unsuspecting person in this congregation who sits alongside of you, who can grumble together with you on some matter of your own life or on the life of this world and country. And in so doing, the cloud of God's presence comes and we feel the trickle a kind of balm that comes to soothe our hearts. Now, while I am the new kid on the block, you have continued to try and minister to me, and any gripes that might form on my lips, they melt. They melt like the morning sun because I am continually fueled by your welcome. And I'm reminded of just how fragile we can be with each other. I'm so very grateful that we can continue to feel full, sometimes on very little. Have you thought about the substance of manna itself? There are different theories on this. I think that this is a direction that Amy may have been going as she was helping to select the picture for the bulletin, that there is lichen on these logs, and that there are some biologists and theologians and theorists who believe that it's lichen, that flaky substance. It's actually more than one substance coming together. It's like an algae. And they believe now there's also a bacterium that comes and a fungi. What a trifecta, right? And that at some point in the early hours of the morning that it did indeed cover like frostiness on the ground, and so they could go. And the word manna, we believe, we're not quite sure, but we believe it comes from a word meaning, what is it? I don't quite know, but when you're hungry, perhaps some of you know that you'll eat just about anything that's in front of you. Some people say that it was tamarisk. It was a part of something that was on a tree, helped fed by insects, a sugary, sweet substance that could indeed in the morning come about kind of alongside the dew and indeed feed the people alongside those quails. What is it? The other piece of the complaint that we have to look at more than the grumbling itself is the reality of the flesh pots. What we described as lichen or tamarisk and the quails is going to seem small in comparison to the large meals that were likely available, again, to fuel the labor. And we think about the flesh pots of our past in our country in particular as they are tied to the institution of slavery. And we think of the byproducts of slavery that remain not only in our past, but still inform the economic disparities and the discrimination that we see alive and well in our nation today. But white folks in particular seem prone to look at decades past with a starry-eyed sense of greatness, without weighing the heavy constrictions that have continued to face people of color disproportionately. And the reality is that we are all in chains as a result, when our brothers and sisters yet suffer. For even if a couple of those Israelites had stored away a little bit extra bread by which they were munching, a little bit extra of things that had been back in Egypt that somehow 6 weeks later they had held on to, they are still in a posture of suffering, as is true for those who are so incarcerated in our country, as is true for those who are in holding cells at our borders. I tell you all of this because I have a confession along the lines of Psalm 51. I wonder what words I need on my heart to still me so that I can confess that I don't want to go out into the wilderness. I told this to the youth when I met them in Atlantic City on Friday, where they are having a bit of a beach vacation. Sat down with Avery and others that you would know, and as we were sitting there, we were talking about what's going on in our country, and I said, I just confess that I don't want to go to Lafayette Park. You may know that next weekend, is the year anniversary of Charlottesville, when members of the alt-right had gone to Charlottesville and marched the streets toting torches. And I forced myself to watch some of the footage that Katie Couric had gleaned from that place in that time. That the faith leaders there in their stoles, they always want our faith leaders to wear some recognition, some collar, some stole, some robe, something to indicate that they represent community kind of in a similar way that Moses was a representative of community in that public space. And as I watched, I became increasingly aware of how much I don't want to go downtown. I don't want to go downtown because of the words and the language that seems to puncture my heart when I have to listen to it. That I almost don't want to believe that that kind of talk and rhetoric exists, much less stand alongside of it. And I have to face that as we stand squarely at the White House, that it is tempting to go and look at the leadership and unload the complaints. Many in faith communities are planning to go to be in protest. And I've determined that I am going to go, but I can only go if Psalm 51 is on my heart. If I go devoid of my own agenda and my own perhaps self-righteousness that I have everything figured out, if I go devoid of the sense that I have everything to teach and nothing to gain, for I know that it is a paucity of imagination that leads people to think that there are too few resources in this country to accommodate white people and non-whites. I'm going to protest hunger, not humanity. I'm going to protest the legacy of scarcity that fuels fear and hijacks otherwise transformable hearts. I'm going because I don't want to hoard what I have, as becomes tempting to the Israelites when they finally get a little bit of bread. As the collective body of those gathered next week cries out from different sides, perhaps, of a different kinds of hunger, have the opportunity to stand in solidarity for those who have escaped flesh pots, including ourselves. For what we are told of the world will be our mammon and our greatest joy's desire to fill up on all that we can get. We're told that in reality, all we need is the lichen on the logs. All we need is a little bit of that tamarisk on the bark. All we need are the little signs of grace that are going to tide us over into the next day. Because isn't that what we rely upon to face each and every day? For as much as we might gripe and complain simply by turning on the news, we are called to see transformable hearts, even amongst those who speak unspeakable hate. We consider the initial liberating response that God offered to those who were hungry to break free from the chains of oppression, and we believe that signs of justice yet may fall into the desert of our resurgent bigotry, and that we all might have a chance to taste of God's mercy new every day. For through the wildernesses in which we believe there may be just an absence of empathy, we are called to be that empathy. That we, embodied in our own persons, may be manna, ready to descend and fall upon the public sphere in the places where we otherwise would choose not to go. I want to tell a little story about St. Francis. He was going to visit one of the hermitages connected with his order, and there was a young squire there who was keeping tending over the door. And when he arrived, the squire said, "You won't believe what just happened. Some robbers and some murderers known to the community came up to the door looking for bread, and I got to turn them away and send them down the road. Aren't you proud of me?" is basically what he was trying to say to St. Francis. And St. Francis said the words that would help speak unto his heart and said, "Here I have brought bread and a bottle of wine. Go chase after them now. and bring them back, that we might share this together. Chase them down and bring them back. They were to become some of the community there of St. Francis. For what is more transforming that in all the midst of the hate and the legacy of derision, what's more transformative than when grace keeps on showing up? And that in the most difficult moment of hunger, it is not mammon that saves. It is manna. What is it? I ask you. I'm looking at it. I believe in it. I believe that we are called to chase down the unspeakable. Bear ourselves. Share our bread. In the next couple of weeks, we will be focusing in on bread as a worship task group. There'll be different ways in which we look at it in the life of faith. I want to draw your attention to the red sheet as it's in front of you, asking that today or in the weeks to come, you take the time to reflect on what communion has meant to you as we think about Jesus and the breaking of the bread that he offers in and of who he is, humanity, divinity. We're collecting some of these stories, some of these reflections, in order that we might be blessed by the telling of them on the last day in which we share together. For as much as it is about me and the cleansing of my heart as I go and I protest, or you go and you protest, when it comes down to it, we need a collective community we can return to, so that we might ever be known in the breaking of the bread. And my question before you today, manna, what is it? And how are you able to chase down something this week? To share it, to share yourself.